As well, I'll be going over deconstructing what the Prime Minister and the first government speaker had to talk about. I will try to summarize as best I can. We heard a lot of stuff that was slightly off topic, but I'll try to keep us back on topic as best as I can. And following that, I'll go into our three main points. The second main point I'll be talking about, first one is the lack of legitimacy that my colleague talked about before, about treating businesses as guilty until proven innocent, which is what side government completely failed to clash with. Second being the internal conflict, which I'll be talking about, the two aspects, the business aspect and the employee aspect. And I'll be leaving our third point for our leader of opposition, the moral dilemma, why this is corrupt in nature. Now, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, we heard a lot of things from side government. A lot of things that contradicted themselves, a lot of things that they weren't sure of, and a lot of things that essentially tried to build fear-mongering amongst the Canadian citizens. What did they do, Madam Speaker? They brought up the case about Enron, and they brought up the case about Nortel. Two companies in Canadian history, or in history in general. That's the two cases that they could come up with that could make a sufficient case for this, for fear-mongering. That's essentially what they're doing right now. They are fear-mongering. Why do they want to do that, Madam Speaker? Because they want to remove the risk from themselves. I'm going to say this time and time again. They want to remove the risk from themselves and essentially just give a whistleblower some monetary value instead of taking the accountability on themselves. I'll take a question.
Madam Speaker, not only did the 2008 recession financial crisis demonstrate that corruption can be widespread, but isn't it really important for us to recognize that small errors such as the manipulation of LIBOR can affect millions of people's ability to get good?
Thank you. Wow, that was quite the statement, and I really hope I was going to get a question out of that, but that was very, very quick. Now going back to my speech, Madam Speaker. Side government has nodded time and time again about creating professional whistleblowers. They actually want to seek individuals out of companies and incentivize them monetarily to rat on their company. Now that would be fantastic. That would be fantastic if we had those two businesses operating in Canada. If we had an Enron or an Nortel operating right now. But right now we don't see that because we've learned from that. Because the departments that operate under the government have learned from their mistakes and they've bettered themselves. But side government completely fails to recognize their own capability in putting more money into their investigative body, like what my first esteemed delegate talked about. Instead, they just want to throw money at the problem and they want to hire whistleblowers within companies to rat themselves out. Essentially fear-mongering, which is what they're doing to people in the crowd and Canadian citizens as a whole. Now, Madam Speaker, the first government speaker came up here, and they talked about very few cases, and they also agreed that people do whistleblow. And they also said that, quote, managers fire people who whistleblow. Now, I'd like to say that again. Managers fire people who whistleblow, because it's going to go exactly into my main point. Madam Speaker, they also said, they talked about international relations. But in reality, pushing this bill will be inhibiting our international relations. I'm going to get into that in our second main point, into my main point. I'll take your questions.
Madam Speaker, is side opposition honestly so cynical that they believe that the world and investors won't appreciate a place where ethical business can be done and won't appreciate having those ethical companies move into their nation?
That is actually a fantastic point. I would love that. I would love to see that. So why are we creating an atmosphere where we have to pay our citizens to rat on their own government? Is that just defeating the purpose that side government is so trying hard to bring up? Why would international business investors want to invest in a country who actually has to rely on paying individuals in a business to rat out their own business? That does not make sense when side government has to keep up. But that finishes off my deconstructive. I'd like to move into our main points. First main point that my esteemed delegate talked about before was lack of legitimacy. Treating businesses as guilty until proven innocent. But I'm up here to talk about the internal conflicts and the two aspects under that. The first one being the business aspect. Now, Madam Speaker, we have to realize that certain businesses retain information. Now, this information is not even illegal. It probably isn't even illegal, but it gives them a competitive edge. And what side government is doing is they're incentivizing people monetarily to pick out any information they can to try to get a reward. What if that information gives the business a competitive edge? Then next thing you know, that information is leaked, and people have lost their jobs and that business is dissolved. Such is the case like what people from Enron had to go through. It is a vicious cycle, and that's what government is creating. I'll take your question.
Madam Speaker, is the opposition member actually suggesting that illegal practices are something that should be stolen and replicated by other companies in the private sphere?
Thank you. I'm sure that side government can answer that for themselves because that is kind of a ridiculous question. I have no idea what to go on that, but thank you, Senator. As well, the second point about employee aspect. Now, that is the bulk of it, the Canadian citizen. What I've been coming up here and saying time and time again is that side government does not focus on the Canadian citizen, and that's what we should focus on. The person who's actually working in the offices, the average person. Because apparently, most Canadian citizens are Nortel or Enron. We have to watch out for that, but that's not the case. Madam Speaker, we have to realize that these people can lose their jobs from such actions, from such incentivized actions. And that how are we going to guarantee these people's confidentiality and they're going to lose their jobs? If someone whistleblows, what side government failed to bring up before was that if someone does whistleblow, how are they going to guarantee their confidentiality and get their job back? Side government completely failed to recognize that, and that's what side government should be taking focus on. Is that how is that person implemented back into the workforce and guaranteed a job after they receive a gigantic monetary allowance or award? Who's going to want to hire them? And we have to make sure that those citizens are protected, but side government completely failed to realize that. Now, that'll conclude my speech. I'd like to just reiterate what I've talked about before. I deconstructed a lot of things on what the PM and first government speaker had to say. They essentially are fear-mongering. They really only brought up a few cases that dictate this, but I pointed out that their own departments can look after this, and that they completely failed to realize that. Maybe they should just take the and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, second member of opposition. I now call the second member of government to the podium.
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm going to do a number of things for you today. The very first thing I'm going to do is a little bit of clash with what side opposition has brought forward today. Point out some of the just actual fallacies in their arguments and explain how what they're worried about is actually exactly what we want, and I'll explain why that's the case. And then I'm going to go into our constructive argument. We've already heard from my partner, we've already heard the first argument, which is talking about how this will lead to greater stability. Because if we're able to regulate companies more efficiently, we're able to change their corporate culture, we're less likely to have an Enron. My second partner then also talked about the social fabric of these companies and about how it's beneficial to have people seeking out fraud. We want people to seek out crime so that crime doesn't happen. The more self-regulation we have, Madam Speaker, the less we need to put money into fraud investigators. And then I'm going to talk about the legal implications and about why these crimes are real, because I think side opposition is underestimating the magnitude of criminal offenses that might be able to be perpetrated by corporations. Now, just a little bit of clash. Firstly, I'm going to go through this very quickly because there's a lot of points that I think can be handled with just a single sentence. So firstly, this idea about ethical choices can't be made based on monetary value. Absolutely, they can be. That's the entire nature of capitalism. Capitalism is based on you get reward for something that makes the system better. You give people better products, they buy from you. Even if they aren't considered moral choices in and of themselves because they're self-interested, we still get the benefit. We want to have a benefit in our system. That is why we give out bounties to hunt down criminals. That is why there are bounties associated with high-ranking Al-Qaeda members, because they are going to help us. They're going to help us in the long run. We don't care what your interest is. Secondly, this idea, basically side opposition doesn't want to look for wolves, Mr. Speaker, but if there are wolves in wolves, or Madam Speaker, sorry, but if there are wolves in sheep clothing, then maybe there is someone to distrust. Now, side opposition has suggested that these are rare cases, but they don't need to be the massive collapses. They can be things, not only, as I've already talked about, things like libel, things like misrepresenting data on financial statements, but they can be things like small crimes, like not being correct on how you qualify your employees, or even tax evasion, a serious problem that is not just one or two companies in Canada. So we see that these are other issues that should be addressed, and that we do want companies self-regulating themselves and stopping themselves from doing it. And then lastly, we've got this interesting argument about the idea that it gives a competitive edge and we don't want that leaked. I simply want to ask side opposition, does the financial regulators of Canada have a habit of leaking public information? Because we don't think they do. We think generally our government is pretty good at keeping information hidden, because they obviously have a whole lot of information that isn't released to the public, and generally we think they do a pretty reasonable job. They're not releasing this to the public. And lastly, Madam Speaker, I want to just point out the very final end of the side opposition speech. We heard this idea in one moment about how will they get a job in the future? What's going to happen to this person after they commit themselves to whistleblowing? What's going to happen to them is that we're going to give them a benefit so that they don't need to worry about it. Because the status quo is they whistleblow and now their life is in turmoil. We want to give them the opportunity that they can make an ethical choice and not be desperately punished for it. Yes?
Madam Speaker, they mentioned that the government has a good hold on confidentiality, but they also said that management always threaten to employees if they're going to make a claim. So how is this cohesive?
Well, firstly, we're talking about two entirely different organizations. Yes, it's just when we have actual examples of this. Management does threaten employees. Management of corporations that are corrupt often threaten employees who are below them. We think that's entirely unrelated to the fact that government is able to keep documents hidden. We think that those are totally different things that don't in any way contradict one another. Now, I'm going to get into my constructive argument, and it's really important that we recognize what are we talking about when we're talking about these corporate actions, illegal actions. And of course, people in the States did not think that their financial corporations were lying to them until the financial crisis happened. We want to see this be proactive, not retroactive, and see major collapses. So, Madam Speaker, why do we even have these laws in the first place? Now, we see that these corporations have massive power over people's lives and people's investments. The first example of this, I want to look at some financial assets that have been recently manipulated in order to have financial gain on behalf of companies. And it would have been very beneficial to see that these be stopped and what the implications are of these actions. So firstly, let's look at LIBOR. This is a rate set between banks, Madam Speaker, and the impact on manipulating LIBOR it's very difficult to underestimate. And this is merely companies lying. This is the scale of magnitude of things that we want to have people, professional whistleblowers looking into, not at this time. Madam Speaker, the effect of LIBOR being changed affects millions of people's lives as interest rates are changed, as the bond prices at which the Spanish government is able to get money for its day-to-day funding, as that is manipulated by companies. There's a reason that's illegal, because it affects millions of people, literally. Yes?
Madam Speaker, I was just wondering, as side government pointed out before, how people are going to live off their incentives. How are they supposed to live off a 1 to 5% reward from those crimes?
It's very exciting that side opposition both wants to say these rewards are way too big and we don't want professional whistleblowers, and then they're way too small, they can't live off them. Madam Speaker, if they pick one of them, we're willing to defend it. We've already defended that they're not too big, because we like professional whistleblowers, and we defend that they're not too small. We think that they're a reasonable amount, and we actually think that it's reasonable if they're a small value, that probably is a minor offense, and they'll be able to continue on with their lives. So now I'm going to continue on in my constructive case. Another good example of lying with financial assets is misrepresenting risk. This was a major problem in the 2008 financial crisis. Again, a problem that we didn't realize until it was too late. So what this does, Madam Speaker, lying about risks, it actually changes people's portfolios. It changes people's investments. It changes people's pension funds because their fund managers are incorrectly, because they have the wrong information, are incorrectly investing their money. Again, affects millions of people. This is not a simple lie. Same can be said for tangible assets. Same can be said if people misrepresent how much money they have. Again, affects shares. Same can be said if people do tax evasion. They are avoiding paying their due taxes, hurts all Canadians. Madam Speaker, there is a reason why these acts are illegal. There's a reason why we try to stop companies from doing them, even if they don't collapse. Even if they never get caught, there's still a reason why this is a bad thing. There's a reason this is illegal. So given that these laws protect things of such magnitude, is it not government's duty to do everything in their power to stop these crimes from being committed? Why on earth would we possibly not look for the wolves if they're out there? And this idea that we're going to be persecuting all of these people, that you're innocent until proven guilty, we're clearly not going to be levying fines here and there. There'll still be criminal proceedings like any other normal whistleblower. So, Madam Speaker, because, of course, we want to know, and because of the implications, let's support an ethical Canada.
Thank you, Second Member of Government. I now call the Leader of Opposition. opposition for their 5-minute speech, followed by their 2-minute rebuttal.
People such as myself can be tempted to act in my own self-interest, but I have to be very careful to morally evaluate what decisions before me. But others, many people, can find this temptation to be strong, especially within organizations. And this is going to relate to what side opposition is saying today with regard to how side government has set up an incentive model and how it's flawed. So going off this, our question today is, should we be encouraging distrust among Canadians and looking to point the finger at every single instance and encouraging this with monetary, self-interested rewards? So this resolution is about awarding the whistleblowers with a percentage of financial penalties from their testimonies. We've talked about lack of legitimacy, internal conflict, and I'm going to speak to you about a moral dilemma. I'm then going to go into a deconstructive and a final rebuttal. So starting with this moral dilemma relating to the intro of my speech today. This resolution is corrupt in nature. Confidentiality, on the other hand, can foster a protective environment for whistleblowers. So instead of focusing on something that is very self-interested in nature and something where you're seeking a financial monetary reward, why don't we just invest our energy into making sure whistleblowers can feel comfortable and secure with what they're doing so that they can, the ones who are honestly wanting to go off their moral concerns, can report these injustices and don't have to worry about, as they said, managers threatening them to be fired with this energy. I think that's what side government should invest in.
But Madam Speaker, aren't even the corporate regulators that side opposition wants to see us increase funding to, aren't they even motivated by their paycheck? And isn't that a good thing for government as a whole to have regulation happen, even if it costs people money?
Thanks for the question. Now, going along this, I feel that government is trying to dodge the point, and they're saying that, look, if something is happening in one instance, it should happen in this instance as well. The reason this is different is because right now, as I have been talking about, we're going off a moral concern and the fact that whistleblowing concerns employees who feel an obligation to bring forth fraudulent activity. Now, often, if they do this, they're doing this because they feel a need to do it. And there's a moral dilemma here, and this is what I want to talk about. So the moral dilemma is we like whistleblowers. We want to encourage it. But there's a cost-benefit analysis to this. We want to reward them by giving them money. But by saying we'll give you money, we're encouraging otherwise non-whistleblowers to go out of their way and try and become whistleblowers. Let me paint a picture on this. So an employee thinks he sees fraud, but maybe he doesn't have the expertise to know if it's fraudulent. And then he goes forth to make a claim. He then starts to think he may be proven wrong, that it wasn't indeed fraud. But he remembers in his head that there's a monetary incentive here. What we're saying as a nation, as a government, is that when there's something wrong, this is an incentive so that when evidence has come forth against that initial moral reason to come forward, that employee may continue to go forward simply because he wants to act in his own self-interest and he realizes that this is something that can be further nitpicked at. And there's a whole lot of moral ambiguity and concerns with this because maybe he doesn't like his employer. Maybe there's a lot of other issues that side government hasn't addressed. I feel they failed to address it, and they live in this mentality that we have to crack down on this, and everyone who comes forward is going to be acting in a moral way, and they're all going to be legitimate cases. With monetary value, this isn't the case. And as I said, if I'm tempted to act in my own self-interest, it isn't always for the betterment of society. Take your last question.
Madam Speaker, does side opposition honestly have so little faith in our court system that they think people trying to create systems to seek monetary reward won't be noticed by the lawyers and judges who regulate our financial industry?
Thank you for the question. So let's bog down the legal system. Let's create a bunch of cases because we're incentivizing a system to make people come forward and make accusations, and they haven't determined a penalty for those who come forward who weren't truthful, and they failed in their plan to address that, which makes that question invalid. So moving forward from that, what message does this send as a nation? A respectable source may come forward with strict confidential guarantee alone. Now, this is a case where there's no control issues. When you think about a business, when you think about a government, we have to think about control. All of a sudden, truth is no longer the primary motivator for this whistleblower. All of a sudden, the primary motivator is a self-interested motivation based on financial monetary rewards. So, bringing this forward to a close of my constructive, I would just like to ask again, should we be encouraging this pointing fingers where fingers do not necessarily need to be pointed? based on this reward, and from a human resources perspective, as far as motivating employees, as far as incentivizing individuals, is this the message we want to be getting across? Now I'll move into my deconstruction. Side government talked about promoting whistleblowing at any cost, even if it meant sacrificing credibility. They then basically said, with their POI, they tried to pigeonhole us. They said, you know, do you want illegal practices to be replicated? And they did it to pigeonhole us. So my delegate didn't have an answer because it's such a ridiculous statement. It is so ridiculous because clearly, obviously, we don't want illegal practices to be replicated. And again, thank you for bringing up that question earlier. This resolution today undermines true investigators who can provide factual information. It doesn't promote whistleblowing at any cost that sacrifices credibility of the people coming forward and giving said tips that government thinks they can benefit from. As far as the legal aspect, we were talking about how we want to seek out crime, but are we going to seek out crime in every single instance when the incentives are clearly wrong? Are we going to risk citizens' jobs by not focusing on confidentiality rather than focusing on monetary incentives? If there's a reward that's super huge and all of a sudden someone comes forth with a reward, where did they get this money from? Isn't it more likely that people are going to find out this person came forward because they have a random monetary award laying around? I think that's a little bit suspicious. And if anything, they're more likely to be caught by their employer if they somehow received a reward for this. There's suspicions, there's explanations, and this manager is going to be seeking out that employee a little bit more actively. So they also went into a huge legal speech about companies manipulating things and how it's illegal. They then talked about manipulating taxes, and we're aware. I think the Canadians see through this complete divergence from the plan, and we're talking about ethical debate here. So as far as stable economy and social implications and legal ramifications, they're talking about whistleblowing at any cost, they're talking about stable rewards and learning from crime, absurd view of corporate culture, and what I'd like to ask is, should we continue to do this, or should we develop a proper incentive system, embrace confidentiality, and we all would like to fight injustice, but this government clearly does not know how. Thank you.